Think about what happened on the night of May 14th, 2026. Not what the newspapers assembled for you, not what the alerts pushed to your phone. What actually happened in the same night on the same planet in what is already being described by serious analysts as the most civilizationally legible 24-hour period of the decade. On one side of the Earth, the two wealthiest private citizens in human history were sitting in a meeting room in the Eastern superpower's capital. Elon Musk, Jensen Huang, the man who controls the satellites, the man who designs the chips, the architect of electric mobility, and the architect of artificial intelligence infrastructure, together, shaking hands, on camera. On the other side of the same Earth in the same hour, the world's largest standing army launched 1,600 weapons into a single city in a single night. Not 400, not 600, 1,600 drones, missiles, guided munitions. A number so precise it could only have been deliberate. These two events were reported as separate stories, separate headlines, separate pages, one in the business section, one in the international section. Because that is the grammar the press operates in, the grammar of categories, the grammar of separate rooms. But what happened on May 14th was not two stories. It was one story, told in two grammars simultaneously. And the only honest sentence about that night, the sentence that no anchor, no columnist, no institutional voice has been willing to finish, is the one I am about to say. Most people are not going to connect these two events for you, not because they do not see the connection, but because naming it plainly, saying what it actually means that both things happened in the same hour, would require them to say something the system does not currently permit. Here is the framework. I call it the two-grammar thesis. Every civilization has a dominant grammar, a logic by which power operates, expands, and reproduces itself. The 20th century's grammar was military bloc formation and ideological supremacy. Two opposing camps, each claiming to represent the future of humanity, each organizing the world around that claim. The grammar of the century we are now inside is different. It is the simultaneous, uncoordinated, and consequence-free operation of corporate empire and military empire, not as opposites, but as complements. Two hands, one body, no accountability linking them. By the end of this, you will understand May 14th not as a news day, but as a demonstration, a proof that the system is functioning exactly as designed. You will understand it more precisely than 95% of people who watch the same events unfold. The anchor number for tonight is 1,600. According to multiple open-source defense intelligence trackers, including the Oryx project and the Kyiv Independent as of May 14, 2026, when 600 weapons were deployed against a single city in a single night. That is the largest documented single-night bombardment of a civilian capital since the Second World War. To scale that number, 4 weapons every 90 seconds, without stopping, for 10 hours straight. That number is not background. That number is the grammar of this century speaking at full volume. And the question nobody has answered yet is who decided that was acceptable. To understand why those two things happened on the same night, you have to begin where most analyses refuse to begin. Not with the events, but with the system that made both of them possible simultaneously and without consequence. In 2013, a document was quietly adopted that serious geopolitical analysts would later describe as the most consequential economic blueprint of the century. It outlined in systematic detail how one civilization intended to extend its gravitational pull across more than 140 territories. Through infrastructure financing, through technology transfer, through the deliberate repositioning of supply chains, and through the patient, structural recalibration of which capital flows went where. Western observers at the time called it a development initiative. It was not a development initiative. It was a doctrine. And the doctrine had a second layer that almost no mainstream analysis correctly identified. The second layer was about timing. The doctrine said, let the old order overextend. Let it exhaust itself in wars it cannot decisively win. Let it spend $2 trillion rebuilding the same rubble in different countries for 3 consecutive decades. And when that overextension reaches its maximum structural load, be present in every boardroom, at every table, with every capital window still open. 13 years after that doctrine was adopted, Elon Musk and Jensen Huang flew east. These are not ordinary businessmen. Between them, they control the core hardware of the century's most consequential industries: satellite communications architecture, electric mobility infrastructure, semiconductor design, and the physical computing layer on which artificial intelligence runs. Their combined net worth, as of May 2026, exceeds the gross domestic product of the vast majority of sovereign nations on Earth. When they travel together to the same capital, they are not traveling as individuals. They are traveling as infrastructure. Dr. Orville Schell, director of the Center on U.S.-China Relations at the Asia Society, described what is happening between Western corporate capital and the Eastern superpower not as commerce in the classical sense, but as, and I am quoting him directly, the quiet rewiring of dependency. That sentence deserves to sit for a moment. Not trade, not investment. The quiet rewiring of dependency. What that means concretely is this. When the two wealthiest humans on the planet land publicly in the same capital in the same week, the signal transmitted to every sovereign wealth fund, every pension manager, every institutional investor watching is not philosophical, it is operational. The calculation has been made at the very top, the doors are open, and if you are not in that room, you will be on the wrong side of the next decade of capital accumulation. That is the grammar of corporate empire, operating at full volume, in one theater. Now hold that image, because in the same hour, 1,600 weapons were falling on a city whose name has become the central word of the 21st century's most documented war. The bombardment, confirmed by the Kyiv City Military Administration by May 15, 2026, hit residential buildings, a maternity clinic, and a university district. 12 civilians killed in the first confirmed reports, 87 injured. A campaign that by every open-source metric is not decelerating, it is intensifying. And the two richest men on the planet were in a meeting room when it happened. The historical parallel for this combination is not obscure. Every serious student of the late 19th century recognizes the signature, the period when the wealthiest private citizens in history were consolidating industrial capital at a pace no democratic institution could regulate, while simultaneously, in the colonial theaters of Africa and Asia, military grammars were operating at full intensity. Those two grammars did not coordinate. They did not need to. The logic of capital expansion and the logic of military expansion do not require coordination to move in the same direction. And the era that produced both of them ended in 1914. Now here, at approximately 4 minutes, is the moment that should stop you completely. Both events happened in the same hour, the meetings and the missiles. And there is one institution that was watching both, in real time, that had the mandate, the legal mechanism, and the declared authority to connect them into a single response, and chose, deliberately, to treat them as unrelated. That institution is not a government. It is not an army, and it controls more of what happens to your savings, your job, and your children's future than either of those two men. It said nothing. That institution is the international financial architecture. And what it did on the night of May 14th, or more precisely, what it chose not to do, is the clearest diagnostic available for understanding what this century has actually become. Let me be precise. The International Monetary Fund was established in 1944 with one foundational mandate: to maintain the stability of the international monetary system and prevent the economic weaponization that contributed to the Second World War. That is not a political reading of its purpose. That is its founding charter, adopted at Bretton Woods. On May 14, 2026, the largest single-night bombardment of a European capital in 80 years occurred. And in the same 24-hour window, the two most prominent private citizens of the Western financial order were publicly visiting the capital of the civilization that has, since 2022, maintained the economic relationships that have kept the military campaign viable. Not through covert channels, through private capital flows, technology transfer arrangements, and the quiet maintenance of trade relationships that no sanctions architecture has successfully severed. The IMF said nothing. The Bank for International Settlements, the central bank of central banks, said nothing. The G7, which has made economic pressure the stated centerpiece of its response to the conflict, said nothing about two of its most prominent private citizens traveling publicly to that capital on that specific night. This is not a failure of awareness. This is the system functioning precisely as designed. Here is the counterintuitive statistic. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute's 2025 annual report, released April 2025, global military expenditure reached 2,618 trillion in 2024, the highest figure ever recorded in human history. And yet, in the same 12-month period, private foreign direct investment into the Eastern superpower from Western origin capital exceeded $47 billion. Not government investment, private. The people who speak most loudly about economic decoupling are the people whose capital is most deeply coupled. That gap, $2,018 trillion to enforce a set of declared geopolitical values, and $47 billion flowing toward the civilization those values are ostensibly arrayed against, is not a contradiction. It is the defining feature of how 21st century power actually operates. Two grammars, no accountability between them. Here is where this enters your life directly. The chips in the device you are watching this on were designed with semiconductor architecture that flows through supply chains running through both of those conversations simultaneously. The one in the boardroom and the one decided by 1,600 weapons. The AI systems that will determine whether your job exists in 5 years are being negotiated in the spaces between those two events. The energy infrastructure that will power those systems and determine what you pay for electricity by 2030 is the subject of the capital agreements being finalized in the Eastern capital as you watch this. This is not a geopolitical story happening to other people. It is the foundational structure of your own economic future being assembled without your consent, your awareness, or your vote. The second layer of this argument is about what it means when both events can happen simultaneously, without coordination, without accountability, and without consequence. The technical term in systems analysis for this condition is normalization. When extreme events occur repeatedly without producing a rupturing systemic response, the threshold of what registers as extreme migrates upward. A 1,600 weapon bombardment of a civilian capital becomes a data point. A public visit by the two wealthiest humans on Earth to the capital of a civilization maintaining the economic viability of an ongoing military campaign becomes a business trip. The extraordinary becomes operational. And when the extraordinary becomes operational, the only grammar left is the grammar of acceptance. That is the grammar this century has chosen. And the moment you see it named, the moment you hear it described not as a failure but as a design, the question that follows is the one nobody on television will ask. Here is the part that nobody on television will say plainly, and the reason they will not say it is exactly the reason you need to hear it. What we are watching is not a crisis that interrupted the system. It is the system completing its own design, and the design does not have an off switch inside the current architecture. Let me say that with full precision. A crisis is an event that disrupts the system. What is happening is not disrupting the system. The global financial architecture, the military-industrial framework, and the digital infrastructure order are not failing to prevent this. They are producing it. They are designed to produce it. The progressive concentration of capital and kinetic power in fewer and fewer nodes, operating with diminishing accountability across a planet where the majority of people have no meaningful input into the decisions that structure their lives. The night of May 14th was not an aberration. It was a proof of concept. Here is where the historical parallel becomes genuinely uncomfortable. Every serious student of the late Roman period recognizes what it looks like when two grammars operate simultaneously in different theaters without moral coordination. In the 4th century, the eastern half of the Roman system was expanding its commercial networks, the silk routes, the grain circuits, the luxury trade architecture, while the western half was losing the military capacity to secure its own borders. The two halves did not coordinate. They did not need to. The commercial grammar and the military grammar were operating according to their own internal logics. And the result, not intended by any single actor, not planned in any single decision, was a century of structural fragmentation that historians eventually agreed to call the fall of an empire. The endings of eras almost never look like endings while they are happening. They look like business as usual in one theater and escalating disorder in another. And the people most certain the system will hold are usually the people most insulated from the theater where it is not. Before the next part, something deserves a full stop. The bombardment on May 14, 2026, killed, according to the Kyiv City Military Administration, confirmed by May 15th, at minimum 12 civilians. 87 people were injured. The documented strikes hit a residential district in the Shevchenkivsky neighborhood, a maternity clinic in Pechersky, and the grounds of a university in Holosivsky. These are not military targets. They are the places where people go to be born, to live, and to learn. Every policy framework, every boardroom meeting, every geopolitical calculation discussed on that same night sits on top of those 12 names. Those names do not appear in the earnings calls. They are not in the investment prospectuses. They are, by the grammar of this century, in a different section. Now, the probability assessment that strategic planners are working with. The Rand Corporation's March 2026 trajectory modeling for the Eastern European theater placed the probability of negotiated territorial settlement or military exhaustion within 18 months at 22 to 28%. The probability of geographic escalation, expanded weapon categories, or additional state actor involvement in the same window, 55 to 62%. Those numbers have risen in 6 consecutive quarterly assessments. They are not static. They compound. The gap narrative this produces is precise and fully documented. The official diplomatic posture of every major Western institution since March 2022 has been, we will not allow this to succeed. We have the economic tools. We have the alliance architecture. The campaign will not be sustainable. The observable reality as of May 14, 2026. The campaign is larger than in March 2022. Bombardment intensity is higher. The economic relationships that sustain the campaign have not been severed. And the two private citizens who most visibly represent the technological future of the Western economic order chose, not covertly, not reluctantly, but publicly and on camera, to be in the Eastern capital on that same night. That gap between the announced posture and the observable reality is not a communications failure. It is the structural signature of a system that has decided, below the level of language, below policy, at the level of capital flow, to continue. That is what the night of May 14th revealed. Not that something went wrong, that something is working. Step back from the specific events for a moment, because here is what all of this, the boardrooms, the bombardment, the institutions that said nothing, actually means for the way every person watching this understands their own relationship to the systems governing their life. What I want you to take from this is not fear. Fear is not useful. What is useful is the map. Because when you understand the grammar, the actual structural logic by which power is operating, you can see what is coming before it announces itself. And that is the most consequential thing you can possess in a world that is restructuring this rapidly. Now let me give the counterargument the honest hearing it deserves. Smart analysts with serious credentials look at everything described here and reach a different conclusion. The argument is coherent, and it contains real truth. It says, you are connecting events that are not connected. Corporate executives traveling to a major economic capital are making rational market decisions in a global economy where decoupling is self-destructive, both for the companies and for the consumers whose costs it would raise. The bombardment is the product of a military campaign with its own momentum, entirely uncoordinated with any boardroom conversation on the other side of the planet. These are two events that fell in the same 24-hour news cycle. Assigning civilizational meaning to chronological coincidence is a form of pattern seeking that serious analysis should discipline itself against. That is the serious version of the disagreement. And the honest response is, the counter-argument is correct that there was no coordination. Musk and Huang did not call a military command before boarding their flight. The military command did not time the bombardment to coincide with a business visit. These two grammars do not coordinate. And that is precisely the problem. The argument that defends the separation of these events is itself the clearest expression of the century's defining choice. The choice to have no grammar that holds both things in the same sentence. The choice to evaluate the boardroom visit on its economic merits and the bombardment on its strategic merits, and never ask what it means that both can occur simultaneously without either placing any constraint on the other. Every civilization that has produced durable periods of relative human flourishing has developed, through law, through theology, through philosophy, through some architecture, a grammar that refuses this separation, not perfectly, not without contradiction, but functionally, a set of principles that places limits on what can be done for profit and what can be done for power, and holds those limits even when the immediate cost of holding them is high. We do not currently have that grammar operating at the civilizational scale, and May 14th, 2026 is the clearest demonstration of its absence. Here is what to watch. 3 things, specifically. Watch where the next major technology infrastructure agreements are signed, and which capitals host the signing. That will tell you which grammar is governing the next decade before any policy announcement makes it official. Watch whether the RAND Corporation's 55–62% probability range moves up or down in the next 2 quarterly trajectory assessments. And watch whether any major institutional voice, a central bank, a multilateral body, a significant political coalition, develops the language to hold both of these events in the same sentence and respond to them as one story. If that third thing does not happen, the probability of the first 2 accelerating is not declining. The Roman Republic did not decide one morning to become an empire. There was no single decision. There were 1,000 smaller decisions, each rational in isolation, each coherent within its own grammar, that together assembled an architecture no one had planned and no one could dismantle once it was built. By the time anyone could name what had happened, the grammar had already changed permanently. May 14th, 2026 is a naming moment. Not because 2 events occurred simultaneously, but because the combination of these specific 2, the 2 richest men in one capital, 1,600 weapons in another city in the same hour, makes visible something the system has been constructing quietly for more than a decade. The world's 2 richest men flew east, the world's largest army fired west, and no institution on earth held both facts in the same sentence and drew the only conclusion they demand. This is the century we chose. The only honest question now is who was included in that choice.